I'm going towards maybe thinking about life from a different perspective, you know?
At what point in developing your adaptation did you get excited about incorporating the theme of fathers and sons?
From the moment I read the book at age 11, I think it was always for me a great vehicle to talk about me and my dad and what it felt to be an odd creature in the world. And then later it became a great tool to also talk about how we pass that pain blindly and how you can stop passing it from generation to generation. So it was always, to me, the two big connections to that theme were Pinocchio and Frankenstein, always.
So two sides of the same coin.
I think that both are very, very similar. That's why the creation of Pinocchio, which is usually done in a benign way, it was done like a horror movie. And the creation of the creature, which is almost invariably shot as a horror scene, was shot as a gleeful, joyful waltz.
I feel that in the movie. That's really there.
What is structurally interesting in the Frankenstein movie is Victor's story is coming to a climax with the creation of the creature. He never thought anything past that point. It sort of coalesces in that night of surgery, and then he goes into the equivalent of a male postpartum depression.
I'd love to hear about the casting process. You know, at what point did both of these actors feel like the right choices?
Well, I wrote it for everybody except Jacob. I wrote it for David Bradley. I wrote it for Christoph Waltz, Oscar, Mia, etc. Felix. All of them were written minutely for them. Even Rafe Innocent. The part of the creature was written originally for another actor, not Jacob. And then 9 weeks before we started shooting, that actor fell out because we had gone through 2 strikes. All the previous commitments had sort of collapsed. So I said, let's wait for a miracle because it's about to happen. And I would consider Jacob Elordi a full-fledged miracle.
A 6'5" miracle.
Yeah, absolutely. He is that tall and he is that massive. And the hardest thing to play with the creature, the way I saw it, was the sort of blank canvas that felt innocent and young on the beginning, and tracking that all the way to moving like an adult, moving like a full-fledged human being, you know. Jacob has that range, and his contrast and performance, physicality to Oscar carries the weight of a very difficult composition, which is very heightened because it's not Victor in the real world, it's Victor the way he remembers things. The way we remember things is a lot more dramatic than the way things really happened. And the way the creature remembers his life is a lot more like a parable or a fairy tale. This contrast needs to exist not only on the written page, but on the color coding and the camera style, but it needs to exist in the performance. And their approach to performance is beautifully a yin and a yang. You know, they form a single person, Victor and the creature, and Oscar and Jacob.
Up until I think the movie was available on Netflix, it was really hard to find images of what the creature looked like. In the movie itself, that's a big reveal that's later in the movie. Why did it feel important to you to keep the reveal secret for so long?
We did not deploy any special operation on that. The movie reveals the creature in the first 3-4 minutes, but it reveals a creature that you will get to see how he got that way. Meaning you start with the creature almost like a hulking monster covered in furs of wolves that you will later see him kill. Raw eye with a rib cage exposed chest, bone exposed fingers, and superhuman strength. And then little by little, you have the duty to redesign the creature, quote unquote, for the audience every time it appears. Then it appears bandaged and covered with a silver rib cage and a silver mask, and then bandages, then no hair and barely clad, and then long hair, and then dressed with the cassock of a dead soldier, and you evolve it and you close that circle. And the less you know people thinking they saw one look and take it as the look, the better. You don't want people to say, oh, I know what it looks like. You want them to learn what it looks like through the drama of the movie. The way we designed it, there's a lot of hidden language in that design. You know, the scars on the forehead echo both a lightning bolt and the scars, the cracks on the archangel face of Victor's youth. The patterns on the head echo the phrenology manuals of the 1800s. The body echoes the statue of San Bartholomew in Rome. There's a lot of text visually incorporated in that design. So the final time we see it is the quote unquote final design. Where he went after the movie, I truly have no idea. I think that he could have stood there alone there for years. For all we know, he's alone with the sun, which is beautiful because the sun becomes the sun.
How much of this movie were you able to execute practically?
I would say over 90 something percent of the film. I cannot really recall many more than one or two shots that don't have a factual base. I think the only shots where there's not a physical element is one of the shots of the mice. And I think that's about it. The rest has a practical element. Now, there's over 1,000 VFX shots, but all of them are practical based. To give you an example, the attack of the wolves is digital creatures, but we shot every single shot with the real wolves in the real location. We wanted to know exactly how the animation was going to behave and have reference for it. We built miniatures, blew them apart for the tower and the lab, as opposed to doing digital miniatures and digital explosions. We made a real miniature for the birth canal shoot when the creature is birthed.
The scene that made me want to ask that question was Victor's first presentation to the other scientists.
Yeah.
That felt like a real puppet you had on set.
It is 100% a real puppet, operated by several puppeteers. We did what people call a Swedish chef, which is a Muppet technique when the hand of the performer is at the tip of the forearm, but it has a puppeteer for the head, radio control for the eyes and the mouth, bladder control for the stomach and the lungs and the heart. So, no, it's a real puppet, and that puppet really catches the ball. It's not a digital ball. The throw and catch were done on camera.
That's the kind of detail I think we've all come to really enjoy from your movies, is that you really do emphasize that aspect.
Yeah, to the ridiculous point that every shot with the ship is a real ship. And when he moves the ship, he's moving the ship with all the sailors on board. When he rocks the ship, he's really rocking the ship with every sailor extra on board. And even the wide shots are the real ship. We covered the parking lot in artificial ice and icebergs, but then we enhanced it digitally to have a horizon and a sea, an ocean. I think that people can tell when there's craftsmanship. And one of the things we're observing with the movie is how much fan art is provoking on the internet, on the platforms. People are drawing, sculpting, painting, creating dolls, sculptures. And a lot of the people say the movie gave me a jolt to rekindle my craft or my art. And I think that's what happens when you see a movie that is so largely handmade.
You've always been very open about what your influences are and who inspired you to become a filmmaker. I can only imagine what that feels like to know that you're inspiring other people.
Yeah, I think the movie comes in a very fortuitous way at a moment when it seems to be connecting, and a lot of it with young people. I always feel really happy when a movie connects with a generation that is earlier. Sometimes it takes a few years to hear the echoes, like on Crimson Peak, which really I saw how it connected 4 or 5 years after it was released, But when it happens immediately, like Pan's Shape of Water or Frankenstein, oh my God, it's so much better because, these people are finding nutrient. And the way I found nutrient on the Universal Monsters or the Hammer films or Douglas Sirk melodrama, you name it. I believe this to be very beautiful in the same way that I hope for at least a generation of kids. The Pinocchio we made, maybe the first one they saw. Even if it was not made for kids, I always said kids can watch it.
Kids can handle a lot more than we think they can.
I think that horror and fairy tale are very good vehicles for parable. And ultimately, Frankenstein is a parable. The fact that Shelley always connected it very strongly and explicitly with Paradise Lost. I tried to also connect it to fairy tale aspects of the creature's biography, The fact that there's a lot ciphered in there, even although I'm a lapsed Catholic, there's a lot of Catholic imagery and cosmology in the film. And the more you dig, the more you see it, is because it's very close to a parable. Some people say, it's an anti-science parable. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it was always meant to be a lot more primal than that. Mary Shelley, yes, invented science fiction in a way as a genre. Some people take exceptions to that declaration, but she definitely invented philosophical horror and spiritual horror. Before that, everything was Judeo-Christian sense of good and evil. You needed the superstructure of Judeo-Christian belief to qualify a horror tale. And Shelley connected it both to the larger cosmology of the questions of why are we here, what makes us human, and also connected it to the grander mythology. Obviously, Prometheus very explicitly and so forth, but the fall from grace of Adam and Eve, the fact that knowledge creates pain, and pain needs to be answered by larger forces than yourself, etc., etc.
What Mary Shelley did was so clear, but at the same time, it's become a text that people really are continuing to bring their own interpretations to.
All the immortal myths can be sung again and feel new. The larger building blocks of human mythology, Pinocchio, Frankenstein, Tarzan, Sherlock Holmes, Dracula, etc. If you change the context and the tone and the intention, you can tell the same story. You can say, I'm going to do Pinocchio, but I'm going to do it on the world of science. Okay, that's AI. I'm gonna do Pinocchio in the world of politics. Well, that's interesting. So Pinocchio grows to be a politician. Well, I want to see that, other than on TV. Or you say, I'm going to do Pinocchio, but I'm going to set it during the French Revolution, and he's going to wander through the battlefields. Okay, I'm interested on that. So it takes just the voice of the singer to make that song anew.
You've gotten to do Pinocchio and Frankenstein. What are you planning to take from these experiences towards your next movie?
Well, very much trying to have a restart, really. You cannot abandon everything, but you can willfully try things differently. And I think that after a certain point, when you're young, you really have to find yourself fighting to, quote unquote, do your thing. And as you grow older and you have a few decades of doing your own thing, you have to stop, quote unquote, doing your own thing. You have to look for a different set of tools. Otherwise, you become older. You become sort of moored by your own expectations of yourself. I intend to test different narrative, different tools, different ways of telling a story, and hopefully they're compelling. I don't know yet.
At what point in your career did you really feel like you were doing your own thing?
I would say Devil's Backbone is the first time, because I felt Mimic and Blade 2 gave me nimbleness, but Blade 2 coming after Devil's Backbone allowed me to be a little less worried about it has to have my brand on it. You don't think about it. Mimic still is almost like a new way of looking at the camera moves, the language of film, the colors, the shapes, and all that. And then Devil's Backbone is, in many ways, I jokingly call it my first movie. And Blade is my first Hollywood movie, if you want to call it that. That's why they're both very interesting. They happen next to each other in 2001. And they are so different because they articulate sort of the pop and the pious. One is a six-pack and a pizza, joyful abandonment movie, and the other one is very, very personal and very minimalistic in a way.
Fast forward to today, and it feels like you found a way to kind of combine both things into these movies that really connect with audiences.
Yeah, I think Frankenstein is definitely an audience movie, and it has proven to be. And I think that it has entertainment and spectacle and size and depth and personality. It sort of marks, for me, the conclusion of a certain style that was interesting to me, and a certain way of telling a story that was interesting to me. And now I'm ready to really be scared and try new tools. David Cronenberg said that to me when he turned 74. He said to me, you got to scare yourself back into finding a new voice. And he did History of Violence and Eastern Promises that departed greatly from the style he had cultivated in his body horror. But still, they are, in my opinion, distinctly Cronenbergian.
So you feel like the next movie we'll get from you will be something totally different?
I wouldn't say totally. You're like a dog with your tail. You can't run away from your tail. you know? It's going to chase you no matter what. But Hitchcock used to say that repetition is style. You can definitely try to move away from repetition, the conscious one. We were talking about Blade 2 and Devil's Backbone and Chronos. They're all reflections on father figures. And you can look at Hellboy, even Pacific Rim with the relationship between Mako and Idris's character, Pinocchio, all of this. This concludes my father fixation of decades, and I don't know where I'm going. I'm going towards maybe thinking about life from a different perspective. I've been so many things now. I've been married, divorced, I've been a friend, I've been a brother, I've been so many other things that I'm interested in talking about.
You talked about using new tools, and I know one of those tools you're going to explore is not going to be AI.
No.
Have you started having conversations with other filmmakers, other creators who are actively anti-AI? Have you been talking about what to do?
Well, I've had conversations with both filmmakers that are pro AI and against AI. But to be completely clear, I'm not against AI in architecture or engineering or law. I don't know enough about those fields to have an opinion. I can only express that if you feed an algorithm of any kind the law, there's a finite number of articles in the law and revisions and amendments and so forth and case histories. So the permutation of those things or the elements in a periodic table in chemistry, well, these are permutations that may be very useful. The number of nodes in an anatomical part, well, those are cross-pollination that can render something great. What I think is to call appropriation of an art form through examples that were done by humans and then call it generational is what I don't conceive. I think there may be cases in which scientists and practitioners of any discipline raised their hand and said, could you give us AI? Maybe. I don't think any artist raised their hand. I don't think so. I may be completely wrong. I'm willing to accept it, but I cannot think of an example. And I think that it sort of banalizes the fact that art without pain is illustration. But it is such a, you either believe in it or you don't believe in it. I don't. And I think the real barrier is if a society ends up making songs written by AI thrive, then that society without a doubt deserves songs written by AI. I don't think that will happen. You listen to Paul McCartney and John Lennon and you know John Lennon lost his mother. You listen to Dylan and you know that Dylan crossed the chasm between folk and rock at his own peril. Meaning this music doesn't come without the life and the biography and the struggles. Van Gogh had to be institutionalized. He quarreled bitterly with Gauguin. That he never sold a painting. All these things inform the urgency of his brushstrokes. If you remove any of that, then it's illustrative art. And illustrative of what? Something not lived? So, the questions are deep. And I do think that this is where Frankenstein comes full circle. I think that it's not anti-science, it's anti-lack of analysis. What it says is, could we think of the consequences before the great idea? And that is articulated in the movie by Mia's character, Elizabeth, who says, this is what happens when ideas are implemented by fools. And you can be a bright, brilliant this or a brilliant that and still be humanly very stupid. And I don't count myself as an exception. I fight for my right to be fallible, stupid, and human. I like it. And I think that sometimes the great solutions of humanity come from that fallibility. And sometimes the great calamities of humanity, most of the time, come from the desire of infallibility.